law enforcement agencies are finding new ways to leverage AIs to sort of work around facial recognition bans. So, of course, there's a number of jurisdictions, agencies who have basically put a blanket policy restriction around using facial recognition software. But there's a lot of use cases where law enforcement need to track somebody down. They need to sort of be able to track their whereabouts moving from one thing to the other. And so what they've done is they've used a workaround that basically tracks other things about you rather than your face. So things like the clothes that you're wearing, your body type, maybe sort of your movement patterns to sort of identify individuals and be able to surveil them moving from one place to another. This is sort of a gray loophole, area because, of course, the legal restrictions around this in these jurisdictions are about biometric data, and biometric data is typically assumed to be things about you that don't change, so your eyes, your face, your fingerprints, so on and so forth. But what about your body shape? Is that biometric data?
I
It might
hope not. I'm
change
trying to
over
change mine,
time.
so I'm hoping that's,
Yeah,
at
so
least somewhat changeable feature of a body.
it's somewhat changeable, but it's not gonna be changeable in, like, the hour that they're using to track you. You aren't gonna get a bunch of change there. So, it's sort of a gray area, and that's where, the ethical concerns sort of come in because, of course, as much as these types of technologies could be used for good when you're on a manhunt because somebody did something really bad and you're trying to find them, it also could sort of, creep into sort of, surveillance of things that we maybe don't want surveilling, right? Maybe a protester that was legally exercising their right shouldn't be able to be tracked if they didn't do anything wrong in that sort of situation. But of course, that could be this technology could be leveraged in that sort of situation. And so there's a lot of sort of potential for misuse. And so I think this really highlights, it's well fitting or well suited for the alignment section because it highlights the need for sort of a public discourse about how we feel about biometric data being used and surveillance generally, because our tools for these types of things have gotten a lot better in the recent years. And so, what do we think is the right line for us as a society? I think is an entirely unanswered question.
It is, and I think it's another great reminder of how I think too often we try and reduce these debates to a binary question about the technology itself. And I think here the real tough questions where you come up with the good answers are how often is this something that's on all the time? Right? Is it who gets to use it under what circumstances with what oversight and recording of the usage of this? Right? What's the trigger for you to be allowed to do it? Just like we have the ability to wiretap phones, and it doesn't mean that you can listen on anything you want anytime you want. You got to get a judge's order, and so having the capability and having restrictions and oversight over when it's used, how it's overseen and governed are different things. And I think too often it turns into a, surveillance technology bad. We should ban the technology. Well, I mean, in certain circumstances, you really want this technology, right? In certain settings, it would be very valuable, and in others, you don't. And so I think it really highlights the nuance. I hate every time I have an ethical discussion with people about AI, there's people who want to have a yes or no. And my answer is almost always, well, it depends. It depends on the details of the specific. Is this good or bad? Depends. And a great highlighting of the difficulty where there's real upside, there's real downside, and the technology, like almost all technologies, can be used properly or improperly. You might have different definitions of what those are, but clearly there's some times when the answer should be yes, and there's clearly some times when the answer should be no. And figuring out the line between is hard, and it's going to be, I think, an ongoing debate as the capabilities change, like where we want to draw that line as a society.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's so individual specific. I've had this conversation a few times over the years with my brother-in-law where I told him like I don't use this type of app or I don't share this type of thing because I don't want I value my privacy and I don't want my data to be available in these types of contexts. And he's like, "Why? Nothing is interesting is happening in your life. Like, why are you trying to keep
A little
that?"
harsh.
Yeah, he's like, "There's nothing that you need to, hide." And if providing that data could be a use for good to catch bad guys and it could help, isn't that a good thing, right? Like it's nobody's trying to surveil you because you're doing crazy things, but if they're trying to surveil someone and they catch a bad guy, isn't that a net positive? So like, why do you care type of thing? And I think it's an interesting he wasn't meaning it mean like nothing's interesting happening in my life. I think he means like nothing interesting to the federal government, right? You're not sending bombs in the mail or anything like that that you
You would
need to be
think.
worried about. So, yeah, so anyway, so it is an interesting question. I think it's like it's pretty highly person specific how people feel about sort of the watchdog type of thing, and, it's a public conversation that needs to be had.
The fascinating part too is the revealed preferences of what people really value, and then what they say they value can be quite different. And so it really muddles the distinction. Lots of people, worried about destruction of Main Street America, and then they Amazon Prime members, Walmart shoppers buying the cheap goods imported from wherever. And And, that's a cognitive dissonance that people don't often wrestle with. And the same thing here, like people, be privacy advocates think, oh, but yeah, but you can't charge for Facebook. It needs to be free, but it shouldn't have ads. And I go, well, those two things don't work together. You've got to be comfortable with the balance of those. It's a hard when you really get into the nitty gritty and the costs and benefits and what people say they care about, and what they really care about, and what maybe they should care about but don't. But we as a society need to protect. They're all kind of different shades of gray on this. So interesting debates for us over the long term.